Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the Vampire Rapist. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. During the late 60s and early 70s, a particularly vicious murderer was loose on the streets of Montreal, Quebec. The fiend attacked young women in their apartments, raping and then strangling them. He also appeared to have one particular terrifying peccadillo. All of the victims were found with severe bite marks on their breasts. It would earn the killer of the nickname Vampire Rapist. The first murder occurred on July 23rd, 1968. The victim, a 21-year-old school teacher named Norma Villancourt, found murdered in her Montreal apartment. She had been raped and strangled, her breast savagely bitten. Yet despite the brutality of the attack, the apartment showed no signs of a struggle. It led the police to believe that Norma had probably known her attacker. However, following up on the theory produced no viable suspects, and the trail soon went cold. 14 months passed, then on October 3rd, 1969, the body of 20-year-old Shirley Odette was found dumped behind an apartment complex in downtown Montreal. Shirley was fully clothed, but a medical examination showed that she had been raped and strangled. Her breasts were also covered in bite marks, but the absence of skin under her fingernails seemed to indicate that she hadn't struggled against her assailant. Has she known her killer? As police pursued this theory, they learned from one of Odette's former boyfriends that she'd recently been dating a new man who had described as dominant, dangerous, and attractive. She had never mentioned the man's name, though. The investigation was back to square one. On November 23rd, a 20-year-old jeweler clerk named Marielle Archibald left her place of work with an attractive, short-haired man who she had introduced to her co-workers as Bill. When she failed to show up for work the next day, her employer became concerned and decided to go to her apartment. Entering with the landlady, he found the apartment in a state of disarray, as though a violent struggle had occurred there. He found Marielle lying naked under a blanket on the living room floor. She had been raped and strangled, and the telltale teeth marks on her breasts pointed to the same man who killed Norma Villancourt and Shirley Odette. One extremely promising clue was found at the scene, a crumpled photograph of a young man. When the police showed it to Archibald's co-workers, they readily identified it as the man she left with. Yet, despite a name and description of the killer, despite the likeliness being broadly circulated via the media, Bill managed to evade capture. 2 months later, he killed again. On January 16, 1970, Brian Caulfield arrived at his girlfriend, Jean Way's apartment to pick her up for a scheduled date. He knocked on the door but got no response, so decided to come back later. When he returned, he found the door unlocked and Jean's naked body lying on the sofa, her breasts severely bitten. An autopsy revealed that Jean had been raped and strangled, and as police began reconstructing the crime, they theorized that the killer had been inside the apartment the first time Caulfield had knocked. Other evidence at the scene showed that Jean had fought hard for her life but had ultimately been overpowered. With Montreal's newspapers carrying headlines about the vampire rapist and the women of the city gripped by fear, the police braced for another attack. But as suddenly as the killer had appeared, he now dropped out of sight. He'd re-emerge over a year later and 2,500 miles away in the city, Calgary. On the morning of May 18, 1971, a 33-year-old high school teacher named Elizabeth Ann Porteous failed to report for work. When she failed even to phone in explaining her absence, staff at the school called the manager of her apartment building and asked him to check on her. Getting no reply to his knocks, the manager entered using a passkey. He found the apartment in chaos, Elizabeth Porteous lying dead on the bathroom floor. Investigators arriving on the scene quickly determined that she'd been raped and strangled, but what concerned them most were the bite marks on her breasts. It seemed that the vampire rapist had shifted his hunting ground to Calgary. This time, though, he'd been careless. Not only had he left a cufflink at the scene, but he'd been seen with Elizabeth Porteous on the evening of her murder. Two of Elizabeth's colleagues came forward to report that they'd seen her in a blue Mercedes-Benz with a young man. The car had distinctive advertising decal on the window, they said, in the shape of a bull. A friend of the victim also told police that Elizabeth had recently began dating a man named Bill. She described the man as well-dressed with neat short hair. The following day, a couple of patrolmen spotted a blue Mercedes parked close to the murder scene. The officers staked the vehicle out and were rewarded for their efforts half an hour later when a man matching the description of the suspect approached. He was arrested on the scene. Under questioning, the man revealed that he was Wayne Clifford Boden, a former fashion model now working as a traveling salesman. He readily admitted dating Elizabeth Porteous, but insisted that he had nothing to do with her murder. The evidence, however, told a different story. A local orthodontist was able to determine categorically that the bite marks left on Elizabeth's breasts had been made by Boden's teeth. It was enough to try Boden for murder and enough to convict him and sentence him to life in prison. But the law wasn't done with Wayne Boden yet. Extradited to Quebec to face trial for the Montreal murders, he confessed to 3 of them, denying involvement in the death of Norma Villancourt. Another man was later tried and convicted of her murder. Boden was sentenced to 3 additional terms of life imprisonment to be served at the Kingston Penitentiary. In 1977, he was briefly in the news again after he escaped from prison. He was recaptured 36 hours later while eating lunch at a restaurant in downtown Montreal. Wayne Clifford Boden died of cancer at Kingston Regional Hospital on March 26, 2006. He was 58 years old. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.